Hello again, and welcome to Faith, Power, and Emancipation. Today, we are going to get into episode 12, which is chapter 11. Chapter 11 is Democracy in Waiting, Resisting Authoritarian Drift. In our previous episode, we began part 4, Building Freedom Before Victory, by exploring the idea of state in waiting. We discovered that genuine freedom is not created on the day of political victory. Rather, it is built patiently through institutions, responsible leadership, civic education, and the gradual cultivation of the habits necessary for self government. Today, we move to chapter 11, Democracy in Waiting, Resisting Authoritarian Drift. This chapter asks a question that has become increasingly urgent around the world. How do democracies die? Many people imagine that democracy ends through dramatic military coups. Sometimes it does, but increasingly, democracies disappear much more quietly, not with tanks in the street, but with small compromises, small erosions of public trust, small attacks on independent institutions, small assaults on the truth. Authoritarianism rarely announces itself, it often arrives gradually. That is why I use the phrase authoritarian drift. Drift is almost invisible. When a ship drifts, passengers may not notice the movement until they are dangerously far from their intended destination. The same is true of political life. Freedom is rarely lost all at once. It is usually surrendered, one compromise at a time, one institution weakened, one constitutional norm ignored, one independent court intimidated, one journalist silenced, one election questioned without evidence. Each individual event may appear insignificant, but together they slowly transform an open society into a fearful one. History teaches us that democracy is much more fragile than many people imagine. We often assume that once democratic institutions exist, they will naturally continue. That assumption is dangerous. Democracy is not self sustaining. Every generation must choose it again. Every generation must protect it again. Every generation must renew it again. That is why I speak of democracy in waiting. Just as the previous chapter argued that liberation movements should prepare for governance before victory, this chapter argues that democratic culture must exist before democratic institutions can flourish. Constitutions matter, laws matter, courts matter, but beneath them all lies something even more important: democratic character. A society that values honesty, that respects disagreement, that tolerates criticism, that protects minority voices, that insists upon accountability. Such a society has already begun building democracy long before ballots are cast. Conversely, a society consumed by hatred, conspiracy, tribalism, and permanent outrage will struggle to sustain democracy no matter how well its constitution is written. This is one of the reasons I believe democracy ultimately or is that democracy is ultimately a moral achievement before it becomes a political one. It depends upon virtues, patience, humility, respect, truthfulness, self restraint, the willingness to lose an election without abandoning the constitutional order. The virtues really received much attention in political. These virtues rarely receive much attention in political debates. Yet Without them, democratic institutions gradually weaken. This chapter also examines one of the defining temptations of modern politics, the desire for strong leaders. Whenever societies experience uncertainty, economic hardship, insecurity, and political division, there is often enormous pressure to find someone who promises quick solutions, someone who claims to have all the answers, someone who assures people that complexity can simply disappear if enough power is concentrated in their hands. History repeatedly warns us against this temptation. Strong leaders often begin by promising efficiency. They frequently end by weakening accountability. They promise unity. They often produce fear. They promise stability. They sometimes undermine liberty. Liberative realism, therefore, insists that we must distinguish between strong leadership and concentrated power. These are not the same thing. Strong leadership empowers institutions. Authoritarian leadership weakens them. Strong leadership welcomes accountability. Authoritarian leadership avoids them. Strong leadership respects constitutional limits. Authoritarian leadership seeks to transcend them. The difference is profound. Throughout this book, I've argued that power itself is not evil. Power is necessary. Without political authority, societies descend into chaos. Without government, justice becomes impossible. The real question has never been whether power should exist. The question is, how should power be limited? The Christian tradition has long understood that every human being remains morally fallible. No leader is exempt, no president, no prime minister, no judge, no bishop, no professor, no philosopher, no theologian, no leader of civil society. Because human beings remain imperfect, institutions must always provide mechanisms for accountability. That is why independent courts matter. That is why a free press matters. That is why transparent election matters. That is why universities committed to truth matters. That is why civil society matters. These institutions do not exist because we distrust democracy. They exist because we understand human nature. This insight also explains why democracy depends upon truth. A democratic society cannot function in a democratic society cannot function if citizens no longer distinguish between evidence and propaganda, if every disagreement becomes misinformation, if every inconvenient fact becomes conspiracy, if every opponent becomes an enemy. Public life gradually loses the possibility of rational deliberation. Democracy then becomes merely a competition between competing narratives rather than a shared search for the common good. This concern connects directly with what we have discussed in the previous chapter about cognitive liberation. A free society requires informed citizens, not merely educated citizens, but citizens committed to truth with critical synthetic realism, this becomes an epistemological responsibility. Reality exists independently of political preference. Therefore, democratic communities must remain committed to discovering reality rather than inventing convenient narratives. Truth becomes one of democracy's most important institutions, even though it cannot be legislated. This chapter also introduces an idea I consider essential for the future of democratic life, that is constitutional humility. Healthy democracies recognize that no political generation possesses complete vision and wisdom. Every constitution can be improved, every institution can be reformed, every law can be evaluated. But such reform should proceed responsibly, transparently, and and within constitutional processes. Humility strengthens democracy, certainty often weakens it. That is another reason why liberative realism rejects political absolutism. No idea deserves unlimited power. No political movement should become immune from criticism. Every government remains accountable. Every institution remains corrigible. Every leader remains subject to the law. Ultimately, democracy is far more than voting. Voting is essential, but democracy also requires trust, dialogue, civil friendship, shared responsibility, the courage to defend the rights of people within whom we disagree. Perhaps that is democracy's greatest challenge. It asks us not simply to protect our own freedom, it asks us to protect the freedom of others as well, even when doing so is uncomfortable. And as we conclude today's discussion, let me leave you with one final thought. Democracy is not inherited automatically, it is cultivated, defended, renewed, and above all, it is lived. Every act of honesty strengthens democracy. Every act of responsible citizenship strengthens democracy. Every institution committed to truth strengthens democracy. Freedom survives not because good people occasionally appear. Freedom survives because ordinary people consistently practice extraordinary responsibility. That I believe is the heart of democracy in waiting. It is the patient formation of citizens capable of preserving liberty long before liberty itself is threatened. Thank you for joining me for this episode, and we look forward to the next. Chapter 12 will be entitled Nations Between Empires, Theology and Geopolitical Realism. If you found this to be insightful or meaningful, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, share it with others, leave a comment below. And if you want to really dive deep, I suggest you buy a copy of this book, Faith, Power, and Emancipation by Professor January Asongu, and it is available on my website, asongubooks.com, or through Amazon and other web uh, online booksellers. Until next time, may God bless you. Thank you.